strong.
Well, hello everyone. Are you ready to get started? Let's get started. So hello everyone. Our lesson this week is on Hannah, and it's from 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 19. So now I'm going to send you over to Miss Latoya for our memory verse and prayer, and I'll see you right back here in just a minute.
Thank you for joining me for our memory verse this week. We're in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 10. Here's our verse. And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord, and weep in anguish. That's 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 10. Join me next week for another verse. Bye-bye. All right, it's time to pray before we start our lesson. You got it. Bow your heads, close your eyes. Dear Lord, thank you for another Sunday to hear the word from Miss Cleo. Thank you for our children for taking the time out to sit down and hear your word today. May they share one thing they learned today with someone. Thank you in advance for what you're going to do today in this lesson. Thank you for continued health. Thank you for continued healing. Thank you for all that you do for this world. Amen. Back to Miss Cleo for our lesson for today.
So welcome back everyone. As I said, our lesson this week is on Hannah, and it's 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 19. Last week, we saw a story about Ruth. Ruth chose to stay with Naomi. She showed her loyalty, and Ruth was a Moabite. The Lord blessed both of these ladies. Today we're going to hear a story about Hannah, and our theme is God hears our prayers. God hears our prayers and answers them according to his perfect will. God pays very much attention to us. He knows all about us. Now, Hannah doesn't have any children, and she's married and she would like to have some. And at this time, if a woman didn't have any children, it was almost like she was cursed. So we're going to read about Hannah's story. So I'm going to be reading it out. The Bible Made Easy for Kids by Dave Strahler. A man named Elkanah and his wife Hannah went year after year to worship God at a place called Shiloh. He loved Hannah very much, but Hannah could not have children, and whenever they went to the temple, she would feel very sad. One day, while they were in Shiloh, Hannah went to the temple to pray. She was so sad that she couldn't stop crying and said to the Lord, Lord Almighty, if you would only see your servant's sadness and answer my prayer for a son, then I will give him back to you, and he will be yours for as long as he lives. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to you, his hair will never be cut. So Hannah is making this prayer to God as she is asking for a son. And as she is telling God that if you give me this son, I will give him back to you. Well, she says also she would never cut his hair. A custom that the people had back then, the Jewish people, was called a Nazirite. And that was someone who never cut their hair, and they were dedicated to the Lord. So they would consecrate themselves, meaning solely they would be about God's work and God's business. They still lived in the world, but they would focus more on doing the work of God and for the kingdom. And so she's saying, Lord, if you give me a son, I will make sure that I give my son back to you. As she kept on praying silently, Eli the priest, who was sitting at the entrance, saw her lips moving and thought she was drunk. So he went to speak to her. But Hannah said to him, Sir, I haven't had anything strong to drink, but I am very discouraged. And I was telling the Lord about how I feel inside. Then Eli said to her, Go in peace, and may God give you what you have asked for." So Eli the priest is watching Hannah, and Hannah is crying out, but words aren't coming out of her mouth. He sees her lips moving, and he thinks she's drunk. She's not drunk. She's crying out in her heart, asking Lord if he would just grant her this prayer request. The next morning, Elkanah and Hannah returned to their home in Ramoth, and the Lord remembered Hannah's prayer, and he let her have a baby. Hannah named him Samuel, which means asked of God. When Samuel was old enough, Hannah took him to the temple and gave him back to the Lord. So Samuel stayed there at the temple with Eli. So God, he granted Hannah's prayer request, and she had a baby. And Hannah kept her promise, and she gave Samuel back to God. So Samuel was young, but after he was a certain age, she took him to the temple, and he lived with Eli until he was an adult. Now, one thing that the book doesn't tell us, and we're going to get to it, Samuel was the last of the judges. He was also a priest and a prophet. So we're going to see a little bit more about Samuel. Also, just for us, God hears our prayers. Sometimes it may be no, and sometimes it may be not now. But we have to be faithful, and we have to have patience and know that God knows what's right for us. He made us. He knows all about us. So that's a little tidbit for us. And, well, just keep on trusting Him. That's it for our story this week. I hope you liked it. See you next week.
Be strong. Be strong.